Volume, clarity, speed, and accent. Volume is so important, especially when you're giving a presentation in a large area. In a large area, you have to compensate for echoes, and you need to be certain that your voice is carrying to the far ends of the audience. So loudness is really very, very important. Second is clarity. If you're speaking softly and you're not speaking clearly, rest assured that many listeners are not going to understand what you're saying, and you're wasting your time and you're wasting their time. Finally, speed. One of the things that I noticed in many of the presentations is that the language speed exceeded language proficiency. Now, when you incorporate accent into the mix, it becomes really, really complicated for a first language English listener. Okay? Now, accent. We all have accents. In America, when I go to the South, the deep South of America, it's very difficult for me to understand their English. When I talk with my friends who are from New Zealand, even though they're first language English, it's very difficult for me to understand their English because of their accent. So accent is something that you always need to consider when you're giving a presentation. Now, if you are giving a presentation to your own classmates in English, they will be accustomed to your Taiwanese or your Chinese accent. But if you are attempting to speak to a first language English audience, you need to slow down, speak clearly, and a loud enough volume so that the first language listeners can somehow decipher through your accent and listen for any kind of phonetic errors and stress errors that you're making so that they can decipher what you're attempting to say. Now, I want to show these two video clips side by side. And so let's go ahead and we'll take a look at the first one. Okay, now let's take a look at the second one. And I want you to consider the difference. Now, in this example, what was really interesting to me is that the first speaker, although there were a number of grammatical errors that the speaker made in that little clip, I was able to understand what the speaker was saying because the speaker spoke slowly, loudly, and clearly. I was able to filter through the accent to understand the content of what the speaker was saying. Whereas the second speaker, the female speaker, spoke so softly that I had a very difficult time understanding what she was saying. Okay, participation, third thing. Participation was varied amongst the different presentations that I noticed. It seemed as though the people who were selected to speak were the people who had the strongest English in the group. But what we were hoping to see was at least 3 or maybe 4 people participating in the presentation. So I felt in some ways that there could have been much more audible presentation by more participants. Finally, critical thinking. I'd like to take a look at this from 2 aspects. First of all, perspective from presentation side, and secondly, from the Q&A side. Stimulating an audience with a interesting, engaging, provocative talk often involves leaving the audience with questions so that after they leave the lecture, they have the desire to go and research the subject more thoroughly on themselves. When a presentation gives answers, many, many answers, and the audience does not have any questions, oftentimes there is not much meaningful exchange. So, embedding questions in the presentation stimulates the audience to think critically as they're listening to the speakers. Now, I really liked this presentation because I thought they did a good job.
But he tried to make her feel better. In these 2 cases, the same is that they are both patients, but his attitude is totally different. Why?
Why? The speaker is not just giving answers, but the speaker now is challenging the audience to ask critical questions. I thought that some of the presentations did a nice job in challenging the audience to think critically. Next, let's talk about Q&A. One of the best ways of assessing English proficiency, in my opinion, occurs during the Q&A session. In part because it's at this time where people need to think spontaneously. They need to think on their feet. And I want to just divide this up into 2 components. First of all, were student questions, and second were student answers. Now, what I saw in the student question section caused me to wonder if the students really were able to understand what the content in the different presentations was. Were they able to understand what the speakers were saying? Were they thinking critically about what was being presented? Or did they know they had a requirement that they had to ask a question, and so they came up with a question? So, first thing was, were the questions relevant to the material that was given in the presentation? Second, were the students able to form a question that the speakers could then understand? Okay, so 2 things. First of all, listening skills. Are you able to listen in English? and then assimilate the information in English. Think about the information critically and come up with relevant questions first, and then second, can you state that question in a way that the speaker can then understand? Second, student answers. When relevant questions were asked of the speakers, it was interesting to see which speakers had a good command of the material and were able to field the question, understand what the questions meant, think about the material that they had been studying and presented, and then come forth with a coherent answer, which is a difficult thing to do, especially when you're operating in a second language. Now, I thought that this last little clip, in many ways,
See, I told you, you should have asked questions earlier.
Okay, here we saw a very difficult situation where the speakers are trying to understand the question. And we see them wrestling for almost a minute, trying to understand what is the questioner actually asking. So, critical thinking. Are you able to critically analyze a presentation and then translate that into a question that is relevant and understandable to the speaker? Okay, this will conclude what I have to say. I just want to once again say that I was very impressed overall with the level of English. And the organization of many of the presentations was very good. And my intention is not to embarrass anyone. It really is to offer these different little video clips as illustrations of ways that all of you can improve your English in a performance kind of setting. Okay, thank you.